Why are NBA offenses so unstoppable today? Since 2016, a new team has taken the crown for the best offense in NBA history, and the numbers have continued to rise. As teams have mastered the concept of pace and space, offenses have felt unstoppable because of the rules. Along with the high volume of threes and constant pace on offense, scoring has never felt easier than before. But are those really the only factors causing this offensive boom? After doing a deep dive, there are a few aspects that we must consider to help explain the offensive explosion that you're seeing over the past decade. One of the biggest factors that has led to the offensive rise is the overwhelming amount of rules that have seemingly favored the offense. For some context, the NBA for the longest time was never known for low-scoring games. Back in the 80s, teams were scoring well over 100 points in spite of offenses looking a bit more traditional. However, things had changed when the bad boy Pistons changed their style of play by becoming much more physically oriented, and it paid off with 2 championships in 1989 and 1990. While it was unorthodox from what the NBA had wanted, the bad boy Pistons inspired other teams to prioritize physicality over finesse. As a result, scoring became a premium in the 1990s and early 2000s, as scores had dipped to as low as the 70s and 80s. But that had changed in 2005 when the NBA wanted to open up the offense by banning hand checking, which meant that defenders could not put their arm on the offensive player. Now, the hand checking rule itself did not significantly increase the overall scoring, but it symbolized the start of a new era of basketball. Since perimeter players had more freedom of movement, they could score at a much more efficient rate. At the same time, players continued to push the bounds of basketball officiating by inventing new ways to draw contact and were rewarded for those actions, which revealed a fundamental change in basketball officiating. At one point, defenders could get away with initiating contact, but as offense became prioritized, the referees started to reward offensive players for initiating contact against their respective defenders. One of the most dumbfounding ways offensive players are being rewarded is the blocking foul, specifically when offensive players would lean their shoulder into the defensive player and be rewarded with a foul call even if the defensive player appeared to be in a legal guarding position. In today's game, offensive players will typically lean their shoulder if they want to create space on a jump shot. We see this on fast breaks as well, when offensive players seem out of control, dip their shoulder, and then get rewarded with a foul. We've also seen players intentionally throwing their body into defenders as well. This type of lean-in motion really peaked in 2021 when players would veer themselves in unnatural directions to draw contact. If they were ahead of the defender, they would lean back into them to draw a foul. When defenders would contest a jump shot, players would at times kick their legs out sideways to draw contact. These are just a few types of antics that players have been doing for years, which has steadily helped increase total scoring. Because of the league's favorable officiating, players are generating more free throw attempts on 2-point shots. In addition, referees have not enforced other important rules over the past decade that have given offensive players even more freedom to score. The first rule that has been called into question is the gather step. The gather step, or the zero step, is defined as a step or steps players take while gaining control of the ball before they take 2 more legal steps. While it is legal under the NBA rules, people have wondered whether players should be entitled to having an extra step as they pick up the ball before taking 2 extra steps. As players have understood this gather step rule, they have invented new moves that we've never seen before. The one that you might remember is James Harden's signature double Euro step. While at first glance it looks like a travel, Harden gathers the ball as he puts his initial step on the ground, which gives him 2 more legal steps to perform the double Euro. The other move that players are using at times is the double step back 3. When it was first introduced by James Harden, it was initially called a travel because players picked up the ball too early before taking 3 steps. But as it got mastered, players have done a great job delaying their gather step by gathering the ball as they start stepping back. By the time they actually collect the ball, they still have 2 more legal steps to execute the double step back jumper. While those moves are completely legal, others have made a mockery of the gather step rule by taking 2 gather steps. What they do is stall their gather step by collecting the ball with one hand to make it harder on the ref to recognize a gather before taking the 2 legal steps to score. Here, Paul George gathers the ball with one hand and takes 2 steps, which represents his gather step, and this technically gives him 2 more legal steps to score. Here, Clint Capella picks the ball up with one hand and only collects it when he takes his second step, which altogether is his gather step. This means he still has 2 more legal steps to dunk the ball. Now, it's fair to say that these examples are likely travels, but that's how the refs are interpreting these moves. In practice, recognizing when a gather has been completed is rather ambiguous, especially when everything is moving so fast. As a result, players have gotten away with more potential travels today than before. The other rule that has been much more flexible is cupping the ball. In today's game, players have been allowed to put their hand completely under the ball. This has allowed players to maintain much better control of the ball and help them change direction much easier, since they can make certain moves that would be much more difficult without carrying. Because the NBA has been more lenient in calling traveling or palming the ball, turnover frequency has slowly dropped over the past decade, which has allowed for more quality possessions. So with the rules essentially allowing less physicality on the defensive end and giving more power to the offensive player, the NBA set it up for offense to take over the league. And as teams continue to learn how to build more complex and dynamic offensive schemes, offenses have made defense feel non-existent. Back in 2016, the concept of pace and space was very new for most teams. Most starting lineups still had 2 traditional big men down low, which made it easier for the defense to slow down a drive and recover on a pass. But as teams started to covet players that could shoot to help improve the spacing on the floor, the pick and roll had the potential to become much more effective than it ever was. In 2016, the pick and roll was more so in its simplest form. A big man sets the screen to help create a 2-on-1 advantage, which puts the defender in a pickle. While the most simplest form is still a powerful way of scoring, teams have figured out much more efficient ways to make the pick and roll an unstoppable action. During the 2016 finals, the Cavaliers had popularized a new concept called mismatch hunting, where the player that had the weakest defender would come screen for the ball handler so that they would get a better matchup. In this series specifically, Steph Curry was guarding J.R. Smith, so JR would come set the screen for Kyrie or LeBron so that those two could get a better matchup, which was a win for the offense. This concept became very popularized, especially for teams that had centered their offense around 1 or 2 superstars. With 3-point shooters everywhere and tons of space to operate against an ideal matchup, mismatch hunting was an effective way to put pressure on the defense. As the game has grown, teams have implemented different variations of the pick and roll to make life harder on the defense. Big men have become much better at disguising the direction of their screen. Flipping your screen at the very last second puts the defender at risk of giving up a lane to the paint. The split-second adjustment that the big man makes to change the direction of their screen makes it almost impossible for slow-footed big men to keep up. Another concept that has taken flight is the ghost screen, which is essentially a fake ball screen as the would-be screener instead runs into space. This is a great way to confuse the defender, as they have to communicate how to guard the screen in a quick instant. During that time span, the ball handler or the screener would have an open lane, which could then help them get downhill. Because it happens so fast, this pick and roll can be super effective, especially when the offense looks stagnant. Here, Halliburton runs the initial pick and roll to get a switch, but Beasley does a good job of getting back. After Heel throws it back to Halliburton, he runs a ghost screen to clear the right side, and Halliburton is able to get downhill and use the floater. Late in the fourth, there's 7 seconds on the shot clock, and Halliburton has to make a play. Heel and Turner both come run the ghost screen, which allows Halliburton to use the whole left side, and he's able to knock down the 3 to close the game. Ghost screens are typically used by players that can shoot the ball because they typically run to the 3-point line for an open shot. As a result, the shooting gravity of a player enables its defender to momentarily freeze, as they have to consider if they need to provide help. For players that aren't as adept shooters, they can run a slip, which is similar to a ghost screen, except you're cutting to the basket. This often works when teams want to blitz hard or switch, as it catches the defense off guard when their focus is on the ball handler. Another way non-shooters can be useful in the pick and roll is by sealing the defender to create space for the ball handler. At times, ball handlers put their defenders in jail, where they would put their back into the defender's chest to give the screener enough time to seal off their matchup, which then opens up a lane to the basket. Because the screener's defender is trying to contain the ball handler, the screener can get in their way to make it much more difficult to challenge the ball handler's shot. As defenses were looking to build coverages to help slow down these ball screens, offenses accelerated by using double ball screens to continue to stay ahead. One of the most popularized concepts since 2016 is a Spain pick and roll, where you would set a traditional ball screen and then have another player set up back screen. The player that sets up back screen typically moves to the 3-point line while the other rolls to the basket. The purpose of the spinning pick and roll is to give the ball handler two direct options, the roller or the shooter, while forcing defenses to figure out how to cover these options in a matter of seconds. While these pick and roll options are all very powerful, there are a few limitations as well. First, defenders naturally have more urgency when the ball is in front of them, and they are better prepared when the pick and roll is coming. In addition, not everyone is equipped to run the pick and roll, especially for guys that aren't the best ball handlers and can't make good decisions consistently. To help accommodate for these weaknesses, teams have started to use another type of ball screen more frequently, the dribble handoff. The dribble handoff isn't a foreign concept by any means, but it's been a powerful action used today. The reason that teams use it so often is because of the rise of 5-out offenses. Since players are naturally going to the 3-point line nowadays instead of the paint, the dribble handoff can often be set up naturally, especially with the big man at the top of the key. But what really makes this option powerful is how fast it happens, which gets the best of defenders, even Draymond Green. Here, Green drops because Tristan Thompson isn't a shooter by any means, but he doesn't see Kyrie Irving coming to Thompson for the dribble handoff, and Irving gets a wide open jumper. What this means is that defenders can't leave non-shooters on the perimeter because a dribble handoff will open up shots for the best shooters. Here, Baby Shea is sagging up Andre Iguodala because he's not a good 3-point shooter, but as Curry throws the ball to Iggy, he runs a quick dribble handoff for Steph, which leaves him wide open in a tie game. The combination of a dribble handoff and a screen provides more advantages than a simple pick and roll. Players can move quicker to the ball without dribbling, which allows them to create more separation and find more open space. With the space created from the handoff, shooters are also more comfortable handling the ball to continue putting pressure on the defense. And when you think you got it all covered up, the man with the ball can always fake it and drive to the rim themselves, which slowly started a major change in the offense. In today's game, big men have more freedom to decide whether to initiate the dribble handoff or audible into a different play. As big men continue to dribble and pass more effectively, this makes it even harder for the defense to anticipate what's coming. For example, here Sabonis looks like he's running a dribble handoff, but he sees Banchero's back turned because he's worried about Keegan Murray getting the handoff. So Sabonis drives past Batadze, which forces Banchero to help, and Barnes gets a wide open 3. With a lot of options to account for, the dribble handoff allows the offense to easily pivot based on what the defense is doing. So even if the defense is prepared for the dribble handoff, they can be vulnerable if the offense decides to counter. If the defender cheats too hard towards the dribble handoff, the offensive player can cut back door for a layup. Other times, offenses will have set plays when the dribble handoff isn't available. Here, Jalen Suggs is cheating towards Monk because he sees the dribble handoff. So Kevin Huerter sets a flare screen to get Monk open on the wing, and he knocks down the 3. In essence, the pick and roll and dribble handoff are the foundation to a strong modern NBA offense because it offers tons of ways to stress a defense. But that doesn't mean defenses haven't tried to counter these new innovations. In fact, defenses have become faster and more creative to slow down the offense. Back in 2016, teams thought that the best way to guard against the pace and space was to switch ball screens as much as possible since it would force offenses to ISO. It had worked so well as the Houston Rockets were on verge of defeating the 2018 Golden State Warriors because they had forced them to ISO so much. However, it was also very unrealistic to have a 7-footer consistently keep up with a quick guard. In addition, as offenses started to diversify more, switching was not going to stop every offensive action. As a result, defenses have become much more creative to throw offenses off. One of the most interesting concepts is putting the best defender as a roamer on the worst offensive threat regardless of their position. That way, if the pick and roll ends up creating an advantage, that defender can nullify it by contesting the man at the rim. This made switching more effective because the perimeter defender could funnel their matchup into the paint and let the roamer do the rest. This strategy protects the roamer from having to guard the perimeter and discourages offenses from attacking the paint like they normally would. One of the other trends is the rise of zone since 2020. In the past, zone felt like a contradiction to the 3-point revolution because the strategy itself implied that you were allowing teams to shoot threes. But today, the zone has become more than just players guarding their respective areas. The teams that play zone effectively have allowed players to move fluidly based on what was happening. This meant that if the ball was in a specific player's hands, the team may change back to man to eliminate any passing lanes. The Miami Heat are one of the best teams at playing zone because they are able to nullify points of attack that teams might be able to exploit in a normal zone. In 2020, their roster had more bigger wings, so they were able to put them at the top of the zone to protect any weak defensive guards such as Duncan Robinson. But in 2023, this team was much smaller, but they were able to adjust by intentionally taking away the middle of the floor where the zone could typically be exploited. This forced players who don't dribble the ball well to beat them laterally, and it helped them get to the NBA Finals. Now, each defensive coverage depends on the personnel and the situation, but those are some of the creative ways teams have specifically handled the pace and space offense. In general, players are expected to cover more ground than ever by helping in the driving gaps when a player drives in the paint and recovering to the three-point line. Using little things like stunting at a guy to make them hesitate or getting your arms up to make the pass more difficult can do just enough to slow down the offense. So even when a star player is ISOing, defenses are still shrinking the floor so the ball handler sees multiple bodies at all times. Because defenses have become more creative, offenses typically run at least multiple actions on each possession to make the defense react in hopes they make a mistake. As a result, complex offenses have become normalized in today's game. If the team is not running at least multiple variations that we have discussed, that offense is more likely than not going to struggle to score efficiently. For example, take the Indiana Pacers, who are the best offense in basketball, against the Milwaukee Bucks, who were a bottom 10 scoring defense at the time. Even then, the Pacers still had to work really hard to create consistent offense. Here, the Pacers bring the ball down, and when Toppin gets the ball, he throws it to Halliburton before ghosting the screen. Tyrese gets blitzed on the pick and roll, and he has to jump pass to find Miles Turner. As Lopez closes out, Turner has to drive past him and throw a perfect lob to Toppin to complete the play. Here, Hield first ghosts the screen and Halliburton comes off a pin down. Turner then slips the screen and Halliburton still has to finish over the 7-foot Brook Lopez to make this play work. One note on this play, the reason this play works is because Hield ghosts the screen, which helps clear out space for Halliburton to run the pick and roll. So here is the reality. Offenses have become much more unstoppable today because they are running multiple actions that all offer deception in their own way. Because defenses all have different coverages to prepare for a singular action, the offense needs to disguise their primary action to throw the defense off balance. What makes offenses so hard to stop is not only what they run, but how fast it's all happening. This forces each defender to be on edge all the time, which is hard to do consistently. But offenses wouldn't be so efficient if the players didn't adapt as well. Complex offensive schemes can only go as far as how skilled personnel is on that roster. As teams have better understood how defenses might react to their offensive schemes, the expectations of what players have to do today is far higher than it ever has been. When pace and space was first introduced, the most valuable type of role player was a 3-and-D wing. Since they were a threat from the perimeter and could defend multiple players, teams coveted these types of wings. But as the pace and space era has progressed, so has the improvement of role players, which has significantly helped the offense. The most obvious area of improvement is the amount of players that could shoot threes today. This season, 46 players are currently shooting 40% from the three-point line, which is the most besides the shortened COVID season. Today, role players are shooting with more confidence than ever because defenses are always going to prioritize the ball handler, especially if it's a star player. But as defenses have built coverages to close out faster to the perimeter, only shooting threes is not good enough today to be a constant viable piece. Because defenders are going to close out hard to shooters, you have to be able to put the ball on the floor to continue attacking the defense. But with more space than ever before, operating within the three-point line has never been more threatening, even if it's not someone's strongest skill or the most efficient shot. In fact, it is more necessary than ever to have a post-game or mid-range in your bag. Consider someone like Al Horford. He's adapted well to the modern NBA by becoming a fantastic three-point shooter. At the same time, he lost his touch in the post and in the mid-range, which may not sound like a big deal because those are inefficient shots. But because of these deficiencies, he was exposed in the last 2 postseasons. Since Horford's main threat has been his shot, he was often dared to take advantage of potential mismatches or in one-on-one situations. In the Eastern Conference Finals, the Heat often played a zone, let Horford get the ball in his hands, and then converted the zone into man coverage. Horford often looked to pass the ball to the corner instead of looking to score, which played right into the Heat's defensive game plan. That's why players that can't shoot today can be more threatening than a shooter if they know how to move off the ball. Because that player is not a good shooter, teams are naturally going to leave them to help cut off a ball handler's driving gap. So when the player cuts, the help defender doesn't typically recognize that because their focus is on the ball handler. By the time the player cuts, the help defender is left behind and the non-shooter can find a layup at the rim. But maybe the biggest transformation of the modern game stems from the utilization of big men. In the early years of pace and space, big men often sat at the three-point line for catch and shoot opportunities. As the big men have continued adapting to today's game, coaches are using them as a wing or a guard depending on their skill set. For example, the Timberwolves' best shooter is Karl Anthony Towns, so they run plays to get him open from off-ball screens. The more popular trend today is allowing big men to operate the pick and roll as a ball handler because it provides a few unique advantages. First, the big man and guard don't want to switch the ball screen because the guard defender is often focused on making sure their matchup doesn't get free. Considering that big men aren't used to navigating screens either, this will often leave a driving lane to the rim. In addition, there is no rim protection, so smaller players can screen and dive for easy layups. But more importantly, this pick and roll is a perfect representation of how far modern NBA offenses have evolved. Today, your official position doesn't necessarily dictate the skills you need for today's game, especially since offense is emphasizing versatility more than ever. With all 5 guys on the court knowing how to do multiple things, defenses have to always give up certain shots to prioritize the main threat. And when defenses have to deal with plenty of movement and ball screens, along with the versatility of each player, it starts to make sense why NBA offenses are so dominant today. So this leads us back to the initial question: why are NBA offenses so unstoppable today? It's hard to quantify which factor truly makes the biggest impact, but there's one thing I do know. While the narrative that the rules, pace, and rise of the three-pointer have increased scoring is true, the complex schemes that offenses run today, along with the talent pool, has helped eliminate as many weaknesses on the floor as possible. The truth is that defensive schemes often have answers to the offensive actions on paper, but understanding how to anticipate what's coming and to react quickly enough is what truly makes defense more difficult today than ever. Even if they could shut off the offense's main action, the versatility of each player on the floor along with the shot-making ability can help create something out of nothing. And as a result, NBA offenses have scored much more efficiently than they ever have before. If you guys enjoy this content, you can check out some other videos here, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.